Whatever you're thinking and doing, think about Brexit. Just spare some thoughts about these very messy and very high-cost political divorce of Britain from the EU, and the deadline is still October the 31st. But the conversations between these very cozy partners now getting a bit tough. French President Macron says there is no option for the new deal being brought forward by the UK new Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So it looks like things are getting a bit messy out there. Let's get a sense of this and the marketplace very quickly from Juliana Layinka, my colleague from our London studios. She's live to us from there this morning. Juliana, good morning.
Good morning, Bosun.
Yeah, this is getting as messy as it can get. There were news that UK will stop attending EU meetings sometime in September. Then we had French President Macron says there's no option. It's not acceptable. So how messy is this getting? Very messy.
Well, we're definitely still in the Brexit coma. Of course, Macron's comments last night to the Parisian press saying that, yes, a renegotiation is not an option. He also even went on to further say that Boris Johnson and his government can still revoke Article 50, which essentially says he can still block Brexit. Really surprising, actually, that those statements have come because, of course, the British press were really hopeful and happy after Boris Johnson seemed to have a very successful meeting with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel yesterday. They had a three-course meal. They were seen drinking champagne outside. And Merkel said, look, you know, we could potentially find a deal where that Irish backstop, which is the burden for Brexiteers, could be taken out of the deal. So the British press were really happy. But then, of course, Macron said absolutely not. A lot of the French press are saying that Macron will be polite, but he will be very firm. He's due to meet Boris Johnson today at noon in the Elysée, Paris. They're due to have a working lunch and then release a press statement. So it seems as if, you know, Brexit is still messy, but there could potentially be light at the end of the tunnel. There was an MP who sits in Calais along that port, and he has been speaking to British press saying that, you know, his region is completely ready for a no-deal Brexit, whether there is a deal or not a deal, that for the past 2 years they've been speaking very successfully with people in Dover. So both sides are ready for a no-deal Brexit. But it's very important. What Macron has to say is essential because, of course, Germany and France are the two biggest economies in the EU, and whatever they say to Boris Johnson is likely to be followed by the rest of the EU members, including Ireland.
Okay, I know whatever happens on October the 31st, United Kingdom still remain a global economic powerhouse. So South Korea says it will continue its trade deal relation with the UK. This is one piece of, well, comforting news, like a needle in a haystack.
Yes, this continuity agreement is due to be signed later today with South Korea, which is good news, good story for Boris Johnson. South Korea is one of the UK's largest export trading partners. Last year, trade between the two countries was about £14.6 billion. Nearly 7,000 British companies trade with South Korea. So this is very good. It basically says whether there's a deal or not a deal, trade and free tariff trade will continue with South Korea. But there are some other measures that need to be taken place. There are some EU components in British exports, and Britain are yet to try and sign a deal with South Korea to confirm that trade will be free on those. And then there are other countries. So far, Britain have signed these continuity deals with about 12 countries, including the Southern Africa region and Israel. But there are still big players that are yet to sign up to a continuity agreement similar to what's going on with South Korea, and that includes the likes of Canada and Turkey. And of course, the reason why those trade deals are so good is because Britain was part of the EU. So there's still a long way to go. But when that deal is signed later today, at least Boris Johnson will breathe a sigh of relief ahead of the G7 meeting on the weekend.
Yes, you do have a lot to keep your eyes on for us, Juliana. Ryanair has failed to secure, to stave off the some strike action there in the UK. Ryanair, that's the airline there. I'm sure quite a bit for you to chew with us in the afternoon. Thank you so much for coming through on the morning show. We appreciate that, Juliana. Of course, back at home, folks are getting seriously worried about what's going on. The stock market still struggling to find its feet, but now if you go across the street to the debt market, there you find a very disappointing news. This was the lowest subscription to debt management office monthly bond auction in almost 2 years. Yesterday, we had the August auction by the debt office, 150 billion naira on offer. Investors bought only 20 billion, 130 billion naira bonds. Naira bonds were unsubscribed. And if you put that side by side with the outflows that we've seen in recent times, then it gives some focus for worry about where we are going as far as the debt market is concerned. That's the big story. But just give you a quick recap of the Treasury bills yesterday, where a lot of the actions are coming through in terms of what we're trying to get some sense of. You heard that we're now seeing yields around 15%, which was we saw yesterday on Treasuries maturing 10th of October 2019. So investors are piling a lot of actions into short-dated instruments. Then, of course, you move to midterm paper, then the long end of the curve. Let's talk to Samuel Musa, who is a fixed income dealer at FSDH Merchant Bank, and is live to us from the exchange place, FMDQ, the home for bonds and other derivatives. Morning, Samuel.
Good morning, Bosin.
Yes, let's start on the side of yesterday's very disappointing Naira bond auction by the DMO. What happened and why?
Okay, so there was a total of 145 billion that was offered across the three tenors, the 5-year bond, the 10-year bond, and the 30-year bond. And the subscription levels were quite low compared to the amount on offer. Subscription was about 95 billion, and the DMO finally sold about 59 billion, which is essentially 41% of the amount on offer. To a large extent, the level of liquidity in the system is attributed to this, in addition to the fact that there is a bit of hesitation on the part of investors to actually invest in bonds at these yields. So if you look at the range of bids for the 3 bonds on offer, you will see that investors are willing to buy these bonds, well, pretty much above 15% levels, which is higher than where the auction closed. So the auction closed at 14.29 for the 5-year bond, 14.39 for the 10-year bond, and then it closed a bit higher as well on the 30-year bond.
Oh, great. So what's the outlook for today? Just a minute.
So for today, market liquidity is still quite short. So the market opened with liquidity at about 267 billion. And there are indications that despite the fact that we have OMO of 92 billion maturing today, we might see a Treasury bill auction to take up this level of liquidity in the system. So for the Treasury bills market, what we expect to see happen is that investor interest will still remain around the short end of the yield curve. So we see more activity on bills maturing between September and maybe February 2020. And then for the bonds market, we see a bit of moderate interest in that space as well, and a bit of cherry picking. So if investors tend to see that the yields on the various tenors being offered are pretty attractive, we might see some buying interest, but nothing really aggressive for the bonds market. So it will be more activity in the Treasury bills market.
Thank you so much. Samuel Musa, a fixed income dealer at FSDH Merchant Bank, out of FMDQ
Welcome.
Exchange Place in Lagos. Thank you so much for being there for us today. Let's wrap it for about 60 seconds with Temple Ashaju, our business correspondent at the stock exchange. The stock market is looking green as we speak this morning, starting to the second day, the morning after President Buhari's cabinet announcement of names and portfolios. Temple, you got 60 seconds here. Read the numbers.
Well, yes, the market is up, Bosin. Up some 0.32%. We're seeing investors continue to take advantage of the gains they can quickly get from the likes of Zenith Bank, Access Bank, GT Bank, banks that are typically known for declaring interim dividends, and of course for H1 2019, which a lot of investors are really still bullish on. For Zenith Bank, the reason why we're still seeing it gaining is due to the fact that the qualification date for the interim dividend is about 30th of this month. So investors are still positioning for that. Access Bank is yet to make its earnings available, but so investors are bullish on it. And of course, the fact that the new ministers are actually resuming their positions, it's a good news. Investors are continuing to see that as a positive step in the right direction. Wilson.
Okay, take a listen to what the brokers are saying on the floor, Temple. They're just behind you there, the usual interactions. Give us a sense of that later in the afternoon when you join the Chimeze Obiwago on Business Incorporated. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of the show. Thank you, Temple. Ashaju, let's send you off on that. We thank our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Have a great day, everyone. And tomorrow is Friday. We'll be here at 10 o'clock in the morning with Business Morning.